If you've been listening for a while, you have heard this lesson 100 times. Ship with what you have. Ship what you have. In other words, don't waste time looking for the perfect tool or process. Instead, ship quickly and iterate. And no one embodies this credo better than Marie Poulin. As one of the best Notion instructors out there, Marie has illustrated time and time again that shipping early and iterating leads to success. We chat about how she uses Notion to deliver her course, gets feedback early on, and leverages YouTube to grow her audience and make sales. Around 90% of her sales come from YouTube. Plus, in Build Something More, we chat about my potential switch from Airtable to Notion. Keep an eye out for how she delivers her course and why she delivers it in Notion, the importance of feedback and why people should not be afraid to get it, and of course, how she iterates. This is such a great episode. You can find everything that we talk about and all of the show notes over at howibuilt.it/289. You can also learn more about our sponsors, Ahrefs, Nexus, and LearnDash over there. But for now, let's get into the intro and then the interview. Hey everybody, and welcome to How I Built It, the podcast where you get free coaching calls from successful creators. Each week, you get actionable advice on how you can build a better content business to increase revenue and establish yourself as an authority. I'm your host, Joe Casabona. Now let's get to it. All right, I am here with Marie Poulin, the founder and CEO of Okie Dokie, the creator of the Notion Mastery course. I'm really excited to talk to her today. Marie, how are you?
I'm great. I'm excited.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being here. A little behind the scenes stuff. If you notice my mic sounds different, which most people won't, and so I'm just kind of like breaking the fourth wall or whatever. I am recording from a remote location. But I'm really excited to do this because I heard you on the Badass Course podcast, and you mentioned something that I thought was really interesting was that you deliver your Notion Mastery course in Notion. And that struck me because I feel like a lot of creators spend a lot of time trying to find the perfect tool, which yes. I think Kehi is a fella that I met / learned about at Craft and Commerce when I went. And he talked about like the 10 versus 100 versus 1,000 versus $10,000 an hour tasks. And finding the right tool is like $100 an hour task. It feels productive, but it's not really making you money. So maybe we can talk a little bit about where Notion Mastery is today, kind of as we record this, and then why you chose to go with Notion to deliver your Notion course.
Yeah, so right now we're hosting about 2,200 people on an enterprise account of Notion. So it's a pretty substantial number of students that we manage in there. Not everybody's active at the same time. And of course, caveat being Notion is not an online course platform, of course, but we thought we're teaching how to master this specific tool. We have the ability to bring people in as members. What if we did this as a read-only workspace where just the administrators could have access to actually writing content and whatnot, but the viewers themselves, the students, would just have that view-only access. And in the early years, we actually used to open up comment access too. So someone found a typo, someone had a question about something, a student could actually comment in real time and we could see those things and correct them as we go. So it's kind of a neat way of doing it. And we just thought, we're sort of teaching people to push the boundaries of the tool itself. And so in a way, the course itself, hopefully, is already illustrating what is possible with the tool right when people come in. So I think there is that element of, whoa, I had no idea Notion could do this right when new people come in. So we just wanted to kind of push the boundaries, even if it's not necessarily having all of the bells and whistles that a lot of, course platforms and tools do.
Yeah, that's really interesting, though, because it essentially gives people like a quick win immediately, right? Because maybe someone buys the course aspirationally, they've never used Notion. Now they have that first win of like actually logging into Notion to use the course, right?
Absolutely. And there's instructions in the first email to say, if you already have a Notion account, they're going to need to learn first, how do you switch from your own personal account to access other accounts that you have access to? So it's taken some time to build up those welcome emails to make sure that we're covering just enough, knowing that people also scan quickly and they don't read. So we don't want to overwhelm people right when they first get that welcome email, but we do need to make sure people do know how to access the course the first time that they log in. So it's definitely been a lot of trial and error it's been almost 3 years that the course has been around, maybe 2.5,
Wow.
3 years, I think. So it has gone through several iterations. Like when we first delivered it, it was us manually inviting guests into my personal workspace, into a single page that had all of the lessons inside it. And again, this was the first iteration. I'm a huge fan of doing beta launches of courses. So it was such a great way to bring people in on the production part of it. So I was directly creating lessons around the questions that people had in real time, and they were part of that co-creation process, which I just think it's such a neat way to do it in the very, very beginning. And you get those kind of super fans that kind of help support it. And so there's people that have been in the course for 3 years and they have seen it through those iterations. And so I think once we hit about 100 students and the sales started to increase, I was like, okay, this is going to be untenable to manually invite people in. There's got to be a better way to do this. And we don't want to mix all of these different names inside of our personal account. So it was going to be a bit tricky. But as ambassadors, some of us, we have access to enterprise level accounts. So I have a free enterprise account. It's not going to cost me a team fee. So not everyone can necessarily do that. That's sort of part of the advantage of being a Notion Pro, a Notion ambassador. So it doesn't cost us anything to run that, but it would be quite expensive if you were doing that. Just anybody trying to do an enterprise account where you're adding members. And what the enterprise account allows you to do is just have a join link. So that way we can include that link when someone joins, they click the button, they've joined the workspace, and that really made that a bit more seamless. So yeah, it's gone through several iterations. And I still kind of think of it as a work in progress because Notion's always updating. They're adding new features. They're changing the way they do things. We have to go back and re-record videos or say, oh, that's not relevant anymore. So it's always kind of growing and evolving. And hopefully students see that as a resource that they can always come back to.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm glad you brought the enterprise thing up because I didn't prep you on that question, but I was curious about it. Now I could see that like making maybe sense for someone who's doing like a really high ticket value private coaching, but I mean, it's not like your course is not like kind of lower end, right? That's it's a reasonable price. But I was really curious about that because you have like LearnDash or whatever. Full disclosure, LearnDash is a sponsor of this episode and almost every episode of How I Built It lately. Oh, awesome. But you have other LMSs that tend to be less cost prohibitive if you are, it doesn't necessarily charge per seat. So that was a interesting thing.
And I think Notion is actually such a great tool for beta testing course content even before you decide to invest in a platform, because that's such a great way to invite a handful of people in, even up to 100 people. I think you could get away with inviting people as a guest into a single page of content for free. So you don't pay for guests even on a personal plan. So I don't even know how much it is, $5 a month or whatever for the personal plan. As a coach or someone, running programs and wanting to share resource libraries with their clients, it's such a low cost way of inviting people in, having them interact with your content, and you can decide, do they get, view access? Can they actually edit the content? So you could create little client portals for your different people and definitely do a high-end offer that also gives them access to resources that you build and you share with multiple clients. So honestly, I think Notion's a great way to kind of beta test and get a course out for very low friction, low price point. Then if you find you're getting enough traction with your stuff, great. Now you can go invest in a learning platform. But in my experience, and I mentioned this to you before, my husband and I used to run a course platform. So we have seen it all. Like we have seen how people sign up for a tool 6 months before they're ready, or they have an idea for a course, but they've not done the first step in even testing if there's any interest in their course. And they're already, futzing about with the funnels and setting up their tech and whatever. And they end up never launching, or, they kind of spend 2 years procrastinating and avoiding and being afraid of launching. And so I just think, again, Notion's just a really great, cheap way to get your ideas out there fast.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And Jono Petrohilos was on the podcast last year, and something he mentioned was most people spend like 6 to 12 months on their course without having any idea if people are interested in it. I am
It's
totally
tragic.
guilty of that. I know it's awful, right? Like, and like I'm like a recovering WordPress developer, so like setting the tech stack up was super easy for me, right?
Yeah.
The marketing stuff is hard, and so I just kind of gravitated towards that because I'm like, well, this is like a quick win for
Do
me,
what's
but
easy,
really,
right?
yeah, exactly. But that's like it was a waste of time. Whereas, absolutely with Notion or like I've been using the Mac app Craft or Mac and iOS app Craft for like taking notes, and instead of like writing a bunch of stuff and then like trying to put it in like a Google Doc or whatever, like you can just share a link to a thing, right? Similar to Notion. Um, Using this tool that you're already using to get feedback as fast as possible, like you said, is a much better way to create and avoid burnout, right?
I think people are so afraid of feedback. Like, I think we're not really taught to um, give and receive feedback well. I think it's a really challenging thing for most people. So one of the first things I recommend is hopping on 20 calls with people. Like, you shouldn't even be thinking about hiring developers and, building a prototype for a thing until you can hop on a call with 20 different people and actually get buy-in on your idea, or someone willing to give you cash up front to invest in that idea. So I think, like you said, people invest in the tech and they go way too far before even seeing, is this something someone wants, or is this something I think is kind of cool? And with Notion Mastery, I was sharing a couple of tips and tricks, and I was, yelling it from the rooftops. Anyone that would listen, I was like, oh my God, this tool is amazing. I was showing my friends
Yeah.
on the weekend how to use it. And I was just so excited about it. And at some point someone said, if you make a course on this, I will give you money. And then when the second person said that, I was like, okay, there's something here. There's a momentum, there's a calling, something happening here, that there's like a stickiness or a magnetism in the market that I hadn't seen before. And I was like, okay, there's something here if I'm barely trying and people are begging for this. And I think people forget to kind of go through that uncomfortable place where you're actually in conversation with people, you're hearing people's reflections and saying, yes, I need that thing. Not only that, I would pay you for that thing. Like the pain has to be strong enough that people are willing to pay for it. So I think people are really uncomfortable about that. But I'm a huge proponent of building and marketing at the same time. So you're teasing out those ideas on Twitter. You're testing where there's resonance. What are the tweets that you send out that everyone's replying to and being like, yes, preach, thank you, right? Just noticing that resonance. And I just think a lot of people aren't quite paying attention that way.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think people, I've gotten, what's the best way for me to say this? I appreciate candor more than I think most people, right? So someone will apologize for being direct in their feedback, but like I would much rather someone tell me I'm wrong and then
Yes.
so I can correct it than go on like living life thinking I'm right
I
when I'm not.
love
Like that's so much
directness.
worse.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I so
absolutely.
appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's no
And
point
so,
in people saying like, oh yeah, like your product's great. Like, want to support you because you're my friend. That is different than real people searching for, trying to find the thing that you're going to build. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have, we'll say a mutual acquaintance, Brian Richards. He's been on the show a few times. I can always count on Brian to give me absolute direct feedback. So like he's usually the first person I'll run ideas by. And he'll be like,
Love that.
how does this help your goal of whatever, right? Helping podcasters
you need those
make
friends.
their %. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So as opposed to like, I was in like a million mastermind groups a bunch of years ago and they're like, yeah, no, that sounds like a great idea. You should do that. And I'm like, cool. And I run with it and like, no one cares, right? Like that's not the kind of mastermind you want to be in. Yeah.
Exactly.
On that note, there is a book called Thanks for the Feedback that helps you give and receive feedback well. It's by Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen. I will put that in the show notes. You can find that over at howibuilt.it/289. Because that's a good book. My friend, again, another friend of mine, Sean Hesketh, like he always gave pretty direct feedback, and I was like green in the field of like making instructional videos, and I was getting like frustrated. I'm like, why do you even hire me then to do this? And he recommended this book, and we had like a good talk. But he's
So
like,
good.
it's like I got better, right? You get better when you get feedback, or you don't waste 6 months on a course.
Yes.
So, something that you mentioned about Notion that I think is maybe I just underestimate it. Like I know that there's like the Notion Nation. Is that what it's called? I'm like a little bit outside of it because I don't like I'm like a wannabe user. It's like incredibly affordable. Like you mentioned, it's like $4 or $5 a month for the personal account. I have the free account. Like the one thing I use it for is sharing these show notes, or my chicken scratch notes with my VA, and then she like makes heads and tails of it. And I don't pay for that at all. Like we're just kind of in a shared database.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah. And so like compare that to Airtable, which is like $480 for me and her to have like table stakes in a base over there. And Notion is so incredibly powerful and incredibly affordable as well.
Yeah, big time. It still shocks me and surprises me. And I think that was part of their strategy too. Like I think they didn't used to have the free plan or in the same way. And so there's just so much you can do, even on a free or just very cheap account if you wanted to invite people in as guests. Because I too used to use Airtable as well. And I found it so confusing to figure out how to collaborate with people. And it didn't feel like you could collaborate unless they were a full member. And I mean, I know every software kind of has its pros and cons and the user experience challenges, but I definitely hired people to help me figure out Airtable. And I was like trying to learn it and hired a consultant and stuff. And so it's funny to me now that I'm doing that for people with Notion. And so I can understand each tool kind of has their pros and cons and things.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm not going to say debate because I think Marie will school me, but we're going to compare Airtable and Notion further and build something more. So if you want to hear the ad-free extended version of this episode and every episode, you can sign up. Again, that'll be over on the show notes at howibuilt.it/289. It's $50 a year. That's less than $5 a month, which you've heard me say a lot at this point. That's less than an iced coffee that I pay for routinely. So,
or less than a Notion account, right?
Less than a Notion account. Look at that. See? So definitely check it out. Again, howibuilt.it/289. Okay, so if we are testing or something that you had early on was comments enabled in the base, that feels like a really interesting way to maybe build a community around your course. And so this is a two-part question. Did it help build a community around your course? And for that beta course, was it brand new Notion users or was it like early adopters? Because your course was pretty early to market as well, right? So like, was it like people like who use it who are like, oh yes, I need this to level up? Or were they like, oh, I just heard of this Notion thing and now this course exists?
Definitely more on the beginner side for sure, because I think even myself, I was maybe more on the early adopter side. There was one Notion course that was already floating around. I think it was Notion Made Simple. And that was the only thing I could find at the time. Even YouTube didn't have a ton of videos, and it was just such a big learning curve. And so people seemed to be impressed with the way that I was using it. So it did seem like people that had heard about it, maybe knew it was cool for note taking, but doing task management seemed like a whole other beast. There were all these nuances. And so it was definitely more, people that hadn't really done much with Notion. We were not dealing with too many advanced users. But then, that kind of opens up the can of worms of, so we're using the tool that people are learning about, and that's where they're interacting. And we knew we needed some kind of interactive element. At least I think whenever you're doing courses, at least the first time you're doing a course, you need that feedback cycle. And so the only way to do that is to open up comments or have some kind of community or forum. So we tried to set up a really, really simple database. And then even then, that was a learning curve around permissions. Like, do we give people full editing access? And Notion also didn't have such granular features around, can they edit the database or can they edit the content inside the database? There were all these funny things. So we'd have people adding stuff, but forgetting to add their name, people accidentally adding 20 different blank entry. Like, there were just funny things happening. So it felt like it was requiring a lot of cleanup. And I'm like, oh, okay, you don't know until you open up the floodgates that you're like, okay, that wasn't so clear, or we didn't have instructions for that. And so again, the more that you kind of let people in and see that feedback and see where people are struggling, you're tweaking, you're changing, you're adapting. And again, because Notion is so flexible, we can be making those changes in real time. I'm sure for some users that probably felt really overwhelming and they're like, every time I log in, this looks different. What the heck? But I think in the beginning, it's kind of inevitable because you don't know what you don't know until you put your work out there. And then you're like, oh, that stuff that seemed really obvious to me is not really obvious to a beginner. So I really need to explain that better. Maybe I need to re-record that video. And I'll share with you, like, I got some pretty negative feedback from someone that I found out through a friend. And it was an older woman, and she was very unimpressed about how fast I was moving and clicking around. And she was angry. Like she was just very frustrated that she felt I was going too fast. I thought, okay, like that, it hurt. But I was like, that's really important feedback because I certainly don't want students to feel frustrated. So I take feedback very, very seriously. When I see people stumbling, I ask myself, where is it a lack of curiosity, or maybe they're just being frustrated in the tool or themselves? And where is it that we're not presenting the material in the best way that's going to be helpful for people? So I really do like to take that feedback seriously because I want it to be of a certain quality, right? And you can't do that without that student feedback. I feel like that might have been a long roundabout way of talking about the community piece of it, but over time, we just realized we need more interaction with the students to be able to improve it, and that's where we needed to kind of shift gears from. Notion was a great place to start, but I felt like we needed something separate that was built and designed for community that we could integrate with Notion and not try and do it all inside of Notion.
This episode is brought to you by LearnDash. Look, I've been making courses for a long time. I've taught at the college level, and I've created curriculums for several different organizations, including Udemy, Sessions College, and LinkedIn Learning. When I create my own courses, there's no better option than LearnDash. LearnDash combines cutting-edge e-learning tools with WordPress. They're trusted to power learning programs for major universities, small to mid-sized companies, startups, and creators worldwide. What makes LearnDash so great is it was created by and is run by people who deeply understand online learning and adds features that are truly helpful for independent course creators. I love the user experience. And now you can import Vimeo and YouTube playlists and have a course created automatically in seconds. I trust LearnDash to run my courses and membership, and you should too. Learn more at howibuilt.it/LearnDash. I guess longtime listeners of the show know that I have taught both online and in the classroom. I taught at the University of Scranton for a number of years after graduating. Gosh, almost 10, I guess. And getting that like real-time feedback from students is so much easier. And because like they might not say anything, but you could see it on their faces.
You could
like,
read their faces and their body language.
Yeah, when you totally lose them, like they're just kind of like what is just like written across their forehead. Or I had one extremely candid student who like, she was great. She like changed my life because I explained this concept in WordPress, pages versus posts. And I explained it like I had for years. And I was like, oh yeah, this is this and that and that. And she's like, I have no idea what you just said. And I was like, wow, this 8-year-old concept that I thought was just like kind of really intuitive is not actually intuitive. And like that like really reframed how I taught WordPress for a long time. So I'm forever grateful to her.
We love students that give feedback.
Yes. Yeah. And okay, so you moved to a different community platform. What platform was that?
Yeah, we use Circle. I had been using it with a couple other courses where I was a participant. I liked the simplicity. I sort of felt like even the way they use emojis, like their docs were all done in Notion as well, their support docs and stuff. So I just thought, okay, It feels visually like it kind of fits with it. And there were some elements and features that still felt a bit in beta, but I sort of felt like it was the best fit at the time. And it's been working out pretty well since. So I'm still really enjoying that platform.
Awesome. Yeah, I used Circle for a while for my membership, and then I was like the only one participating.
Active,
yeah. Yeah, and so I was like, I don't really need to pay like $99 a month for this. But I am like reworking it. I think, again, this goes back to like what tool works for you and your audience, but I suspect, begrudgingly, Slack is probably where most of my audience hangs out the most. And so I'll probably spin up the old Slack again, even though I wanted to avoid that.
The necessary evil, right? Yeah.
Yes. So let me ask you then, for Circle, did you get like buy-in? I mean, like with my membership is relatively small, and I'm pivoting as we record this. So maybe if I started Circle like today with more focus on podcasting like I do, maybe it would go better versus like changing from Facebook to Slack, back to Facebook to Circle. But did you get buy-in I mean, I guess there's going to be those students who just like don't participate at all and they just want to like
Sure.
run through the material or use it when they get stuck. But how was moving to Circle?
Yeah, like I think in the very, very beginning, it feels a bit awkward because you're trying to preset the different channels and figure out, okay, what are the topics and how are people going to use this? And you're kind of taking a guess at it. So we have restructured it a couple times, but we tried to pre-seed a bit of content or have a little bit of content planned in advance and some pinned welcome messages and stuff to kind of help make it clear. And then I think we had some conversations with some of our early, really active users and just said like, hey, would you mind like posting something in here in this channel?
Yeah.
We did hire one of our really active students as well, Stacy. We hired her to do some sort of community support and even just posting something weekly to kind of, these conversation starters. So I do think the very, very beginning when you're just getting a community off the ground is really challenging. But because we do have a fair volume of people that are kind of just joining every day, we have new students, at least a few a day. We're going to get people joining fairly regularly. And one of the things we've tried to do now is bake into the material. Oh, guess what? We have conversations that go way deeper into this in Circle. So trying to incentivize it and also, hey, when you're ready, when you've completed the level 0 challenge of creating your now page, make sure to drop that into Circle and introduce yourself and say hi. And I think there's also an element of even people hiring other people within the community. You have people like, hey, I'm looking for someone who can do my content or marketing or whatever. We say there's a channel specifically for making asks and things like that too. So I think it kind of lends itself well to you're going to get out of it what you put in. But we also recognize for some people, communities can feel like a bit of a distraction. But we really want to make it clear there are things that just reading curriculum that just kind of get missed. And so sometimes those deeper, more nuanced conversations or someone being like, hey, you know what, that part wasn't clear. How would I apply that in this circumstance? Other people likely have the same question. So we've really tried to do a good job over the last couple of years as it's evolved to incentivize a little bit of that and just say, hey, it's always there if you need it. No worries if you just want to lurk and kick back. But these conversations are happening over here and you might miss out. So if you ever feel frustrated, you're not sure about something, hop over here, ask us. Like our team someone is always going to answer within minutes, hours, certainly within 24 hours for sure. So we try to incentivize that. So it takes time for sure to even figure out how people want to use it.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true and a great point. And I think that what I thought in the beginning, I guess, was I would just spin up Circle and people would come, right? Like
Ta-da!
If you build it, they will come.
It's a
like
party.
Here they are. Yeah, hey. And it was not that, right? And even I tried like using Zapier to schedule like Monday, Wednesday, Friday posts, but like people get pretty wise to that. And they like, it's not just like, oh yeah, Friday wins again. Like, here we go. Let's do this. People really want to connect on a more personal level than that. And so I think that's something to keep in mind as I think about how I'm going to relaunch my community for both the creator crew and this cohort-based course that, again, as we record this, I'm working on. Hopefully, as this comes out, it's out.
Nice.
But that's I love that. I wanna pivot to how you promoted yourself and your course, and we'll get to YouTube in a minute. But I was scrolling Twitter today, and I saw that you have a pretty cool thread about how you're using Notion to build like a skincare routine. Something you mentioned in the Badass Course podcast was you like to do the really advanced stuff. So you hired, I think, was it Georgia to do the, or somebody else from your community to do. Oh, it was Kat. Great.
Yeah.
Shout out to Kat. She's great.
She's amazing.
You hired Kat to do kind of the more beginner or more foundational Notion stuff.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about like what inspired you to make that thread, first of all?
Yeah, that's a good point. So that is how I promoted the course. I share how I'm using it, like real world use cases. Sometimes they're really nerdy, sometimes they're advanced, sometimes they're really basic. Sometimes people are like, whoa, the design of that's beautiful, and they get curious. And so I loved I like to share elements of my personal life and sort of this is how it looks like in real life, not just for business. You can use it for personal. And so I'm very, very transparent. I like to share a lot behind the scenes. I love that kind of content when someone's like, here's how we do X. I want to see the real nitty gritty details behind the scenes. So it's kind of how I let people in and they feel connected to me. It's going to be very niche sometimes. Some of the things I share are only going to be relevant to a very small handful of people, but I share them anyway. And people are kind of intrigued by what I'm hoping is that they'll see an advanced use case and translate it to their own databases and think, oh man, I could use that for a product inventory for my tech equipment over here, and just kind of give them inspiration and ideas. So it kind of builds my expertise and people kind of get to know me a little bit. And so that's been a big part of kind of how I've built that. I think of it as the curiosity engine. People get curious about like, oh, wow, that's interesting. I never really thought about using it that way. So those tweet threads always lead to really interesting requests or people checking out my YouTube channel and going down a rabbit hole. And then that always, leads to the course sales. And so I think Twitter and YouTube work really well together as these sort of complementary forces. So it's like I test the waters on Twitter to see what's sticky. And then I record the more sort of permanent evergreen videos on YouTube.
I love that. Because like you're showing, like there's the old adage, right, that those who can't do teach, but that's really not the case anymore, right? People, especially if they're buying like a high dollar online course, they want to make sure that you can do as well as teach. And so kind of showing that sort of thing, right? I've been on like cold pitch calls where someone just like fills in the spreadsheet and they're like, I can help you make this much money. Oh, you just got to do like sell these things and you've made $10 million. And I'm like, yeah, all I have to do is sell
easy peasy.
$10 million worth of stuff. What? Thank God you're here. And so like the fact that you're like showing and telling, I think you've said it, it's a great way to lead to interesting requests. So now you're getting questions that you can answer and more content ideas. And maybe, I don't know if your course has case studies, but like more stuff to put in the course.
Yeah, examples, use cases, absolutely. Yeah. But to answer your question around like the decision even to hire someone else to do the more beginner stuff, like when I got that feedback from that woman, it did make me realize like I get so animated and excited by what Notion can do and the possibilities and like, we could do this, we could do that. And I have ADHD. I get very excitable. I speak very fast. It takes me a lot of effort to slow the F down and take things one step at a time. Remember what it's like to be a beginner. And so Kat has that learning and teaching background. Like she's that's her jam, and she designs trainings. And so I was like, you know what? If I had someone else with this outside lens where we could work together on something and slow it down a little bit and really make sure we've covered the basics, but we only really need to do that once. So she actually helped design a beginner training that's now a recording. So, hey, you want to go through the curriculum in a written form with GIFs and whatever, great. Or you can kind of fast track it and do this 2-hour weekend workshop. It's recorded. There's a workbook that goes along with it. Nice. And so she really helped set the pace for that and say, we're going to cover this in 5 minutes. By the end of it, the student can do this, and like really stepped it through. I have no interest in running a beginner workshop on foundations. Kat would be happy to do that. So I was like, great, let her do that and let her do the stuff she's really good at, super patient, answer beginner questions. To me, like the novelty ran off very quickly. And I'm like, I want to push the tool to its limits and speak to those advanced users. So as long as we've covered both of those bases, and that's not to say Kat doesn't also do the advanced stuff, but I think we just needed a little bit of a different approach and someone who has that teaching background that could really approach it a bit differently. So I have such respect for teachers. Like I've spent the last, 18 months, 2 years learning what it means to be a good teacher and trying to improve my teaching, because it really matters to me that this is a good experience. And knowing how to use Notion really well is very different than learning how to teach Notion. Like that, those are very different skill sets. So it's been something I've been working on, is how do I make sure to explain these concepts in a way that makes sense? How do you break down something that is kind of difficult to explain, and these roll-ups and these lookups and these more complex concepts in a way that lands for people and makes sense and they can translate to other use cases in other parts of their life. So it's been a journey.
Yeah, it's a really smart thing to realize, right, about yourself. Because like I'm sure I'm drawing on my own experiences a lot here, but I'm sure a lot of people can relate to maybe they've been in like a corporate training or like a seminar that they had to do for work, and the person presenting is like super bored presenting this thing that they've presented a million times. And like they don't want to do it, and you can tell. I had to teach like WordPress to a large portion of the University of Scranton, like when we were like rolling it out to do like teacher sites and stuff like that. And it was me and another person. And this person was like, just click on this and it's really easy and this and that. And I'm like, you just made the whole room feel like a bunch of dummies.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
because like you're saying it's easy and this and that. They don't think it's easy. That's why they're here. And it's easy to you because you like to focus on the advanced stuff, person. And so, I think like recognizing that and finding a person who's like really passionate about teaching the beginners and the beginner stuff can really impact how they approach and use that tool. Because I know people who came away from that training with like wanting to touch WordPress even less than they did coming into it.
Well, and I think we had that experience in the beginning too. Like we were going too fast, too quickly, and then people felt stupid. And then they're like, Notion's not the tool for me. I'm out of here. And I'm like, well, that's not going to grow the course if we're just making people who are frustrated and not like beating themselves up. It's like, oh, that's a crummy feeling as a teacher. And I think a lot of people build products because they want to make money and whatever, that's fine. But I legitimately care about the impact that I have. And if the impact that I have is worse than when they started and they feel like they got ripped off, like that is not okay with me. So I just, part of it's my own insecurity. I'm like, I don't feel comfortable or good about people having a bad taste in their mouth, having invested in this sort of thing and being frustrated. So I owe it to myself and to my students to make a really great experience. And I want to kind of hold a certain standard even for other people of like, what does a great course experience feel like where you're actually so stoked to give that person money? You're like, best money I ever spent. Like that's the feeling that I want to create. And so I have to factor in, this is not just the way I want to build the course. I have to factor in there are people that are going to have learning disabilities. There are a ton of people with ADHD in the course, and I have ADHD myself, but it looks very different from person to person. Some people preferring the verbal instruction, audio instruction, and seeing supporting GIFs and examples and things like that. Some people want to see a pre-made thing and pick it apart and see how it works. Mm-hmm. So it's like, how do we make sure to kind of address these different learning styles and stuff? So we actually hired a curriculum designer to help us as well. I think maybe a year and a half into the course.
Nice.
Like last summer. And that was like the best experience. So we relaunched it with new content, new structure, new style. And we get so much feedback from students that saw the first couple versions. And they're like, holy moly, like this new version of the course is it's on another level, because we are really factoring in what does the student need to know first before they jump here, and really making sure it's learning outcome based. So I'm learning a lot in this whole process of how to be a better teacher and create a better experience.
Yeah, and this makes me think about how important it is to charge the right price for your course, right? Because I think it's really easy for people to be like, no one's going to buy this. Like, I'll just price it at like $50. And if like, I say that about my workshops. I'll price it at $50. And if 10 people buy it, I'm happy. But like, that's not reinvest back into the workshop or whatever, or the course money, right? Whereas I don't want to anchor your course to any price in case it changes. But you mentioned in a previous podcast that like maybe early on you were charging, I think it was like $250 or $350, and it went up from there, right?
It was $250, and I think you could add $100 to get a 1-hour consultation with me. And oh my gosh, those booked so fast. I was so burnt out. I had weeks and weeks of calls, and I had to shut that down and say no for a while because it was a little bit too intense. But people were very willing to pay for that extra hour. But I will say, hopping on an hour call with people that are actually going through your content and learning the tool, you learn so much about where those common problems pop up over and over again. So I really feel like that was the consulting side. And I think hopping on calls with people, you just learn so much more than you ever could through written feedback, right? So whatever opportunity course creators have to, whether it's holding a weekly office hours, and that was something I did when I first launched. It was 6 weeks. Every week we have a call together and anyone could ask questions. And that, again, that feedback, that people asking questions and just really hearing people's struggles, that stuff will shape your content. And it should shape your content, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can speak, I'm doing the call thing now. Like I put out a tweet, like, what if I told you I could help you make $10,000 with your podcast, right? And DM me for details. And any DMs, I send them a Calendly link and I say, look, this is not going to be a hard sell or a soft sell or anything. I'm working on a cohort-based course. I want to make it good. And so a couple of I've done a few of those calls so far. One, the person was like, I don't think this is right for me, but I want to hire you to be like my podcast coach. And I'm like, great. Like, so those calls are not only helpful not only helpful to make great content, but to lead to other opportunities as well. I think that's so smart.
I think what's so interesting too is like you might not have thought of yourself as a podcast coach, or maybe you do, but sometimes someone just asking for, can I hire you to do X? You're like, well, guess I'm a Notion consultant now. I mean, that's kind of how the whole thing started. And I was like, well, I guess there's now a whole new industry that didn't really exist before. And now we can talk about it and share our tips with other people. And then what does it look like to consult with a team versus solo? And it just kind of opened up so many interesting cans of worms that we got to decide, okay, do we expand our services beyond the course, or do those services become a funnel to the course? So it's been really interesting.
This episode is brought to you by Store Builder from Nexus. When it comes to setting up an e-commerce site, you have a choice between easy but limited or a limitless platform that you need to manage yourself. Until now. Store Builder is e-commerce made easy for everybody. It saves you time and delivers a storefront that lets you get to selling. As someone who set up multiple e-commerce sites, I can tell you that Store Builder has been a much easier experience than anything else. Answer a few questions, add your content, and sell. Store Builder was created and is supported by e-commerce experts at Nexus. Get the speed, security, and support you need when you need it. Are you ready to launch your perfect online store? Head over to howibuilt.it/storebuilder for a special offer. That's howibuilt.it/storebuilder. And we haven't talked about YouTube yet. I heard about you through YouTube. Specifically, I heard about you through Brian, who I mentioned earlier, and then my friend Aaron Flynn mentioning like how great your YouTube videos were. And then I saw you pop up in a few different places. So what made you go on YouTube? And then how have you leveraged YouTube because you mentioned like YouTube kind of leads to course sales sometimes.
Oh yeah, 90% of our course sales come from YouTube. Absolutely.
Oh, great. So like, how do you leverage that, right? Because that seems like an insurmountable thing to me.
To start a YouTube channel?
No, to like or make other money besides AdSense from YouTube, right? Like,
interesting.
I get like sponsor deals, right? Or like brand deals or whatever, but like I don't know that I can track any direct sales from my YouTube videos. And like the podcast channel is different, but
I'm sure a lot of it's industry specific. Like the fact that at the time there wasn't a lot of content around Notion being so complex. How the heck do you use this? Like, is this me? Is this Notion? Like, it was just this big open canvas. And so when I started on YouTube, there wasn't a lot there. And it was Joel Hooks that recommended, he's like, you need a YouTube channel. And I was like, oh, YouTube, like that's the last thing. Like I was so self-conscious about being on camera, being in front of people, speaking was like a huge fear of mine, and just everything about it gave me hives. I was like, oh, are you kidding me? But screen sharing and showing people how to use Notion with your head in the circle and whatever, I was like, video makes the most sense in terms of teaching these concepts. So I very reluctantly spun back up a really old YouTube channel that just had a couple probably cat videos on it or something. And again, like I did not have the right equipment. No, my mic settings were off. Like you can look at some of my really old videos and it's amazing to me even to hear how quiet my voice is and like just very, I was so scared. I was just so scared of putting myself out there, but I just knew that was a big blocker. It was something I wanted to get better at. I knew that mastering video was going to be a skill that could serve me in so many other areas. So I was like, suck it up, princess. Here we go. I think I did a small challenge that was 100 days of vlogging. Okay. And that was, I think, what really helped me get over that hurdle. And so it was every day, even if it's 2 minutes or just something, just making a quick little video, me in the garden, here's how I'm feeling today, whatever, just getting into the habit of recording those videos and not feeling silly on camera. So that was kind of the beginning of it. And so then by the time, Joel was like, get your butt on YouTube, I was like, okay, made the first couple of videos. And the traction was so fast with those videos and comments and people had lots of opinions and it was pretty new. And YouTube can be wild, wild west with the comments, right? Especially like people make comments about your appearance or your equipment or the way you did something wrong. And so it took a while to kind of build up that thick skin and realize you're helping more people than not by publishing. Like you help no one by not publishing. You're going to help some people when you do publish, and there's going to be some trolls and people that have strong opinions and whatever. And I'm just going to improve. The more that I do it, it's going to get easier. So it felt so awkward in the beginning. But like one of the videos that has the most views, I don't even know, like just a stupid amount of views, hundreds of thousands, was in 2019, terrible camera, terrible mic. Like I had people being like, her videos are great, but her hair's really ratty. I was like, wow.
Oh my God.
People are just so brutal on YouTube. So I was like, note to self, work on hair and get better audio and whatever. So it took a while to build that muscle and build that comfort, but the traction that I was getting from that, the views, was what started to make me realize, okay, like time to upgrade the equipment. Let's get a better camera. Let's learn about this. Let's learn about editing. How can I make this easier, more interesting? How can I slow down? And all of that learning was also helping me on the video side in the course. So I just knew it was a set of skills that I think was worth learning for, of course, anyone that's thinking about teaching. If there's any video in your courses at all, I just think YouTube is just kind of a no-brainer. And then the first thing I did was just put hey, are you interested in this? Grab my templates. And I mean, that led to so many signups. Like that was the beginning of my list building, 10,000 people joining probably in a couple months from never sending out emails before. So it was such a huge jump. I'm like, and then Twitter exploded. The COO of Notion reached out too, like, how can we collaborate? And so there was suddenly this very rapid attention that happened in 3 months' time. I committed to doing one video a week, every week for 12 weeks. So from September to December. And then again, it just got so much random buzz. And I feel like, like people were putting me on a pedestal and they were DMing me and reaching out. And it was a lot really fast. And I was like, I don't have the confidence for this. Oh my gosh. I just wanted to like curl into a ball and hide. Or it's like, I love teaching people Notion, but the idea of like putting your face out there, putting your work out there for so many people to see was super, super scary. And it gets easier over time, so it's something that I had to push through. It feels kind of like a no-brainer now. I'm like, yeah, okay, let's record a YouTube video, whatever. But that was a slog. It took a really long time to start to feel a sense of comfort. And then once the course was kind of ready and in a place that I can turn on those sales, I think it was maybe 2 months of YouTube before the course was ready to sell. And then I switched that sign up for my list to, hey, did you like this? I've got a course on this. And, I can look at the stats from all the intake forums, and I'd say 90% of the course people mention YouTube as the way that they found me. So it's not inconsequential.
Yeah. So you had like an in-video call to action asking people.
No, not even in video, just in the description of random videos, just like, hey, did you like this content? And I think there's something about the nature of this Notion content. Like I can look back and see where people pause something and they're like, wait, at 3:07, how the heck did you do that? Because I was moving so fast, like I didn't remember what it was like to be a beginner. And so every time I'd make a video, people were like, that's nice, but how the heck did you do that? Like, oh, I need to make a follow-up video. So I'd make a follow-up video. And so there's like a stickiness to the Notion content that in a way it felt easy. The comments were like feeding me a never-ending list of ideas of videos to make. And just because, again, Notion's docs it's like how to use the product at a basic level. But I was like, yeah, but what if you did this? And so people were just like, how did your brain think of using it in that way? And I get comments sometimes where I didn't recognize that was Notion. Like, it looks so beautiful. How'd you get those colors? How did you do that? I was like, oh, it's just like, I'm used to bending the product to my will, but other people maybe don't know how I do that. So there's an intriguingness to it that people are like, okay, give me more content, or, I'll just tease some really advanced concept. But I have to be very careful now to say, this is just a demo. This is not a how-to, because sometimes people get angry if they're like, but how do I do that? I'm like, figure it out. Take my course. So I
love that.
Yeah. It's taken a while to figure out how to do the call to action. How is the video serving the course? Is this a sneak peek? Is it like not giving too much away that I'll show you how to do that in the course? So it's been a process.
Yeah. I think I'm coming to an epiphany right now that I probably made my videos when I was doing WordPress, especially like a little too in depth. I'm like, got to cover all the bases. And then people are probably like, well, I don't need to take your course now. Like, I just learned how to use the block editor with this course. Plus, like, I don't want to dog on WordPress too much, but like that thing is notoriously cheap.
Hey, it's how I got my start too. WordPress websites for sure.
Yeah, like see that? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I have a couple of thoughts here, right? 100 days of vlogging. Dickie Bush was on the show earlier in the year. He talked kind of about the same thing, like forming that habit. And I talk about getting your reps in. Like people are like, how do you get so comfortable in front of a podcast mic? I'm like, you just got to get in front of the podcast mic, right? The beautiful thing about like recording stuff for the internet is you don't have to release it. Like
True.
Just do it. Like I tell my students, if you're having trouble starting, record just like 5 demo episodes. And if they're trash them. And if they're good, release them or release them later for behind the scenes stuff or whatever.
It's good practice. You can't, I feel like don't get to skip the messy middle where you're just putting in those reps.
Right. Yeah. Right. It's like, Rivers Cuomo from Weezer, right? Like they had like, I think it was 4 years or 6 years between their first album and their second album because he wanted to skip the sophomore slump that most musicians go through. And it didn't work. Like it didn't work. You don't get to skip the hard, that hard part. And then for trolls, I mean, I'm a dude, so I think fewer people are probably commenting on my appearance. But for any mean comments, I always make sure to heart those mean comments because in my headcanon, they're like, does he know I was like being a jerk or whatever? Like, I just want to assume they're very confused as to why I liked that comment. So,
I love that. Yeah. Such a great little way of getting back at people.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's like because like responding mean to trolls just like kind of gives them power, right? Like, but absolutely being like thanks, right? And then they're like, oh, wait, that's not what I wanted. And then you blew my mind just having the call. Like, I'm like, all right, I got to plan the call to action. I got my button on my stream deck, time it perfectly. Just put it in the description. Like, that's like...
Yep. And you can add end cards later, right? Like, so I've gone back and maybe even slightly reworded videos or update a different thumbnail and just make a couple tweaks to the description after the fact.
Yeah.
And no big deal. So I'm like, do as I say, not as I do. Just shipping wherever you're at, because every single decision like that is something that prevents you from shipping. And a video without a perfect call to action, is better than not shipping that video at all. So I will always go back and kind of optimize it later and just focus on getting the reps in.
Yeah, love that. And that was actually going to be one of my final question here in the main interview, which is, do you spend a lot of because like stats show that like 80% of people click on a video because of the headline or the thumbnail. And so I feel like I spend like too much time on that. So like, it feels like your content was the thing that was the most important thing you were doing was like answering questions people had or showing kind of like unlocking a new level of thinking for people or like showing them what's possible.
And I think maybe at the time there just wasn't enough content around it. So if people were searching for the thing and they found my video and there it is, it's answering their question, they're sticking around. And then of course, YouTube gets smarter about recommending, if this person watched this and then this, they start to recommend more of your content. And so obviously that does improve things. But, I just had kind of crummy thumbnail. I just didn't do any of the things that you were supposed to do. I was just shipping videos imperfectly with like not so great resolution sometimes, or my audio wasn't quite there. Just shipped it. And then once I learned about those things, I'm like, okay, I can do a better job in the thumbnails. Okay, let's build a standard look and feel for the thumbnails and stuff like that. And now there's tons of Notion content. There's lots of other creators and people. And each one kind of has their own style, right? I think people are going to be drawn to the different creators, whether it's their voice, the style of their dashboards, you kind of recognize their style and stuff like that. So I think there's room for a lot of us. A lot of us are teaching some of the same concepts. We just kind of have a different spin on it. And so, I don't think too much about those details. Like I've never been one to be like, must optimize for every now and then I go in and I'm surprised to look at some of the interesting stats and be like, oh, actually people are phrasing it like this instead of this. So if I'm using Knowledge Hub, do they know that I mean this? And so it's good to just kind of look at those things and just make those tweaks. But, I try not to let those tweaks prevent me from making progress and then iterate later. And you can always go back and improve it. So I don't fuss too much about, I probably could stand to or like hire someone to actually go through and be like, hey, here's what your data's telling us. We think you should do X. I'm like, awesome. I will go and do that. But I'm not the one that cares too much about that stuff. There are some instances where like for example, Building a Second Brain with Tiago Forte, popular
just
course.
Finished that book. Oh my God.
Right?
That book.
It's great. And so I did his course when I was trying to figure out how to structure my Notion setup. And so I did a video on how to use Para in Notion. So like that's a very, very popular video, but it's also really old and outdated. So it's actually a really great idea to go back to your most popular content and then refresh it and say, hey, here's how I'm doing Para now. Here's how I'm doing my weekly agenda now, because that was my most popular video. So even that's a simple strategy that like takes something that's been really sticky and had the most engagement and remix it, do something different with that. So it doesn't always have to be something new. It can be, here's where I'm at with that now, which is something I learned from Ali Abdaal, his part-time YouTuber Academy. If you're serious about YouTube, like that course is outstanding.
Awesome. I will have a link to, Marie's channel, of course. Building a Second Brain. I just finished the book and it like blew. That was the first time I ever heard of Para. And I reorganized my craft notebook for that. And then Ali Abdaal, I'll link to that, all of that stuff in the show notes. Again, that's over at howibuilt.it/289. It sounds like as we wrap up here, maybe our big takeaways are use the tools you're most comfortable with, ship and iterate. And you can always update later, right? Oh, and of course, show people what you're doing to give them ideas. Don't necessarily, maybe keep the how behind the paywall.
And I think the first time you interact with someone shouldn't be asking for the sale, right? So there should be that you're sharing what you're working on behind the scenes. People have heard about it several times, and it's not just like, hey, I'm working on this thing here, pay me money for it. So be willing to, I think, be very generous in the beginning when you're sharing like what you're thinking about, how you're working on it, those insights, those tips. But yeah, keep the good stuff behind the paywall.
Yeah, love it. The value stuff, right? The thing that's worth paying for. Be generous in the beginning. You don't ask somebody to marry them on the first date usually.
Exactly.
You don't want to ask for money, especially if it's like a high dollar thing. If it's like a $10 thing, maybe. But I'm definitely gonna, based on our conversation here, and I think this is another important thing to take away is like don't like copying other creators might not work for you, but this idea generation of. I have a few good tools. One's like a podcast planner that I'm working on converting from Airtable to Notion. I got some advice that maybe more people would be interested if it was a Notion database instead of Airtable basis. So, but I mean, I'll keep both of them, but have the Notion one. Add that as a call to action in the description. That's like really, I'm doing what like all the huge YouTubers that get like 10,000 downloads in like the first hour or more like do, and that's not going to work for me, right? Someone's going to stumble upon my video because they're like 5 ways to make money podcasting, and that's when I say like, hey, you want 5 more ways? Like, get this thing. So awesome. Marie, this has been so fantastic. Thanks so much for spending some time with us today. Again, if you want to hear probably Marie convinced me in real time to switch from Airtable to Notion. You can join the creator crew. It's just it's less than $5 a month. So, but before we go, if people want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
If you want to interact and say hello, you can say hi on Twitter at Marie Poulin. You can pretty much find me at Marie Poulin if you Google me. And you can check out our company website is weareokidoki.com, and my more personal website is mariepoulin.com.
Awesome. I will link to all of that and everything we talked about in the show notes over at howibuilt.it/289. Marie, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was awesome.
My pleasure. Thanks to everybody listening. Thanks to our sponsors. And until next time, get out there and build something.